BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Thursday, another Dahlia Thursday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Thursdays, I've been talking to you guys about the Black Dahlia murder, one of the most horrific crimes in American history. And in this episode, I will be responding to the book Anthrax to Zodiac. A snarky private investigator delves into the most notorious unsolved mysteries of the past 150 years. And this is, of course, by Denise Diana Huddle. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Black Dahlia. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. On January 15th of 1947, during the morning hours, a woman and her daughter were walking in Southern California in the Los Angeles area that is now known as Crenshaw, and they came across what they thought was a department store mannequin in a vacant lot. But in reality, this was the dismembered body of Elizabeth Short. She had been cut in half, and her face had been mutilated, and also the blood had been drained from her body, giving her a very stark white appearance. And firstly, I would like to give out a shout out to Flora, who is a new supporter on buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. That's the donation page. There's a link in the description box. And Flora made a specific request. Can I look into the possibility of a mechanic or someone involved in a mechanical profession being associated with the Black Dahlia murder? My answer to that is absolutely. So please look out for some new things here on Dahlia Thursday. And there are going to be some very specific reasons for that, because in this episode, we're finally going to start getting to the letters and communications that may have come from the killer. And one of them appears to have been doused in gasoline or a similar substance. And that could have been done to remove grease, but it could have also been done to remove things like fingerprints. But I do appreciate that from Flora. And there's a lot of other stuff in the description box as well, so feel free to check it out. But as I said, Elizabeth Short's body was found by Betty Bersinger and her daughter, and she was cut in half. In this book here, Anthrax to Zodiac, which covers many different true crime mysteries, it talks about how she was actually cut through the first and second lumbar vertebrae, L1 and L2, and this is quite contrary to everything that Steve Hodel has put out in his Black Dahlia Avenger series. He states that it was the second and third vertebrae as opposed to the first and the second. And it also talks about how Elizabeth Short was identified relatively quickly. I read in one source that it was 56 minutes, and another source it was 59 minutes, but within the hour, because they were using a new type of photo technology, which was more or less the precursor to the fax machine, and they were able to take this photo of her fingerprints, her hands and fingerprints, and they were able to get them compared, and she was identified relatively quickly. However, out of all the stories that I talk about here on Black Box Online Radio, this might be the most difficult case to solve, and I say that for the following reason. The person who committed the murder of Elizabeth Short went to an enormous amount of effort to destroy the evidence, and it goes so far beyond what we're going to talk about with the letters and the communications. One thing that I've been meaning to discuss in some previous episodes is not only was Elizabeth Short's blood drained from her body, giving her the stark white appearance, but also she was scrubbed intensely with some type of brush, and they found numerous bristles that were on her body, as well as for the fact that she may have been stored in some type of refrigeration unit. The person who committed this crime really put forth a strong effort to destroy the evidence. And if you do read this book here, Anthrax to Zodiac, it is advertised as one that is conducted by a private investigator, but one thing that I've noticed when I was going through Denise Diana Huddle's book is she doesn't seem to be using a lot of investigative tactics that would be available to anyone outside of the armchair sleuth community. The majority of sources that she cites are from websites as well as videos, and of course, reading other books, there are discussions on the case file, but there are a lot of commentary sources that are easily available to everyone. And I was quite surprised about that, if it's going to be advertised as one coming from a private investigator. And finally, in the Black Dahlia section, she did clarify that one of her specialties is forensic genealogy, and her investigations almost have a forte in forensic genealogy. She even refers to herself as a forensic genealogist, so I will give her credit there. But in terms of the way this book is structured, it begins by providing the details that I just mentioned about Elizabeth Short's condition. Then it talks about the communications, the letters, and the suspects. And let's get right to the issue involving the communications, because there is something that is tied to the crime scene. And on one of the most recent AMAs that was done by Larry Harnish, who runs a channel that mostly focuses on the Black Dahlia, somebody asked the question, were there any communications that were sent from the killer that were thought to have been authentic? And he said yes. There was one that almost certainly was authentic, and it's the one that was mailed that contained Elizabeth Short's belongings. And I'm going to look at Denise Diana Huddle's book right here. The most obvious lead in the case came from the correspondence addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner containing Elizabeth Short's personal effects. On the afternoon of January 23, 1947, James Richardson, editor of the Los Angeles Examiner, received a phone call from an anonymous man congratulating him on the paper's coverage of Short's murder. The caller went on to say, "You seem to have run out of material. Maybe I can be of assistance." The call was followed by a special delivery envelope addressed to the paper, which was intercepted by a postal clerk on January 25th of 1947. In letters cut out from a newspaper from movie ads, the 8 by 3.5 envelope was addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers. It went on to say, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." The postal clerk who intercepted the envelope that had come unsealed in transit contacted postal inspectors. The envelope had been treated with gasoline, and police theorized for the purpose of eliminating fingerprints. The envelope was opened in the presence of the police and the postal inspectors and members of the press. The 23 items inside the envelope were as follows, and they were a Western Union telegram regarding a trunk, a Railway Express receipt, part of a sales trip slip printed in ink from the Pacific Outdoor Company, a business card from the Pacific Outdoor Advertising Company, a business card from A.D. Bricks, business card from Jack Kleinen, House of Hollywood Realtor, a typewritten Social Security card signed with the name Elizabeth Short written in green ink, a piece of a notebook and with Jimmy Harrigan's Army base phone number, a torn piece of a notepaper with Carl Balsiger's phone number, and a notebook leaf with Jimmy Bifulco printed in pencil, a scrap of paper with the name Wayne Gregg written in ink, an ID card for Elizabeth Short, abstract of record registry for the city of Boston, Elizabeth Short, daughter of, and a card from the Hollywood Wolves Association, a business card from Brandt Orr, a Pacific Greyhound Lines parcel claim check, a small snapshot of an aviator and a girl in the cockpit, a small snapshot of a girl in a black fur jacket with a black hat and buildings in the background, a photo of a man in an army uniform standing near a tree and a frame house in the background, and a small snapshot of a victim and a man. There was a small snapshot of an aviator in a flying suit and a parachute, and there was a small snapshot of a woman dressed in a riding habit standing beside a horse, and one black address and telephone book with the name Mark Hansen in Boston gold letters. So these are the 23 items that Elizabeth Short was in possession of when when this person mailed it in. And there's an image that has also been included in the book, Anthrax to Zodiac, with the letters that were cut out. So one of the reasons why Larry Harnish believed that this was something that had actually come from the killer was for this to have been a hoax or a prank. it was an unnecessary amount of effort for somebody to go through to create this hoax or prank. This person cut things out of these movie advertisements, and they did this in a way to disguise the identity. We all remember watching these older TV shows and dramas when people would do this as a way so that any form of handwriting could not be traced back to them, but also the ribbons on typewriters would record the content that would have been written, and then they could examine the ribbon of a typewriter to find out if someone had written a letter on that and mailed it in. But if they cut things out of a newspaper and magazine and destroyed the newspaper or the magazine, that would be an easier way to avoid getting caught. And the fact that it was doused in gasoline. This book states very clearly that the letter was treated with gasoline, and then, as they said, to destroy fingerprints. But I'll keep an open mind about this issue involving the mechanic, and could a mechanic have been involved, and was he trying to get grease stains off of the letter, or just trying to do things to avoid anything that could be traced back to him. On the Larry Harnish AMA that came out for September of 2025, he stated that it might have been kerosene that could have been used to treat the letter, the envelope, and the contents, again, to destroy evidence. What does this say? What does this stuff say about the killer? To me, this is all saying that this is somebody who is extremely methodical. Let's use this for the purposes of discussion, that this letter that contained Elizabeth Short's belongings, like we're talking about ID cards and business cards, let's say that that actually came from the killer. This person is one of the most methodical killers that I've ever talked about here on Black Box Online Radio, and it's not simply the method that is used for committing the murder. I've talked to you about a lot of killers who have put in an enormous amount of effort to commit the murder, like, say, perhaps the Golden State Killer, but he left behind an enormous amount of evidence because after the murder was over, that's when he got sloppy, because he was unable to foresee things like the advent of DNA. Whereas the Black Dahlia Avenger, that's the name that we're going to be using for the murderer in this series, he is one who just absolutely tried to sever any and all link between and among the members of law enforcement, the press, any way that he could have done this. He wanted to send a message that he was responsible for committing the crime. He wanted to send a message that he had dominated Elizabeth Short, but at the same time, he's also not really doing this in a way where he actually wants it traced back to himself. Some people believe that there are killers out there that, well, they're like in plain sight because secretly they want to get caught. I absolutely do not think that about the Black Dahlia Avenger. Otherwise, he would have written just a handwritten letter here. He would have put in hand printing on the envelope. He wouldn't have treated this stuff with gasoline if he actually wanted to get caught, let alone all of the things that were done to Elizabeth Short, where she was targeted, specifically targeted, attacked and humiliated, and put in this degrading position. But the killer didn't do this in a way where anything could have been traced back to him. Let me know what you think about all of this, but, I really do think the Black Dahlia Avenger might be the most methodical killer that I've ever talked about here on Black Box Online Radio in regards to the cover-up. Now, as far as the suspects that are mentioned in this book, this is one of the more interesting sections. It's actually chapter 23 in the book, written by Denise Diana Huddle, and some of them that are discussed are people that I've talked about on the past, even though I don't have standalone episodes. The suspects that I have standalone episodes for here on Black Box Online Radio are Red Manley and Walter Bailey. And she talks about Mark Hansen, and he is somebody whom, as we've heard, she has a connection to him because of the items that were mailed in. Another suspect that is mentioned in a lot of Black Dahlia discussions is Leslie Dillon, and you've also heard about Carl Balsiger, who's going to be talked about a lot in the book Sisters in Death by Eli Frankel. And, this was another thing that Larry Harnish brought up on the most recent AMA. When people were asking about the Black Dahlia suspects, he said, you know what you do with the suspect list? You tear it up and you throw it away. All the suspects from the police and the district attorney's office are suspects, and they were not convicted. They're on that list for a reason, because they were looked into and they were cleared. You should ignore them. And I can see where he's coming from, but I mean, is that real life? Is that real life? No, of course not. How do I know this? Because I've done the Zodiac Killer segment for years on the Monday show, which I invite you guys to check out. And people don't simply back down from a suspect simply being on the list and known to authorities. And they're like, well, they must have looked into them enough to realize that they weren't the killer, and then that's why they were never arrested. The long and short of it is that people don't accept that. But when we do get to the suspect, Leslie Dillon, that is discussed in this book here, one of the biggest reasons why people think that Leslie Dillon might not have been the Black Dahlia Avenger is because he had an alibi. Larry Harnish talks about this all the time, saying that Leslie Dillon was in San Francisco at the time of the Black Dahlia murder, and in Denise Diana Huddle's book, she states that there are 6 alibi witnesses who can confirm that Leslie Dillon was not the Black Dahlia Avenger. And for this segment here, Dahlia Thursday, here on Black Box Online Radio, I've been very hesitant to start making episodes where I talk about the suspects and just go into super hyper analytical modes, because, I mean, it isn't satisfactory to me to just think, well, they were probably cleared for a reason if they weren't arrested for the crime. No. But if somebody has an alibi that checks out even to a certain extent, I'm not extremely impressed with that suspect profile, and I tend to think that there's a certain degree of truth to that. However, though, there is going to be another suspect that we have to talk about almost every single week here on Dahlia Thursday, and his name is Dr. George Hodel, and he's actually referred to as Bad George Hodel in this book right here. So I'm just going to have a read from this book for a second. At the time of the murder, Dr. George Hodel was one of LAPD's top suspects. He had been a child music prodigy and a star medical student before starting his practice in Los Angeles, where he ran a venereal disease clinic. He was a close friend with the surrealist artist Dada and photographer Man Ray, and the movie director John Huston, and he was known for throwing lavish parties for Hollywood luminaries and at his exotic Franklin home. Several factors cast suspicion on Dr. George Hodel, and in the years immediately following the murder. First, the police were of the opinion that Elizabeth Short's corpse had been bisected by virtue of a surgical procedure known as a hemicorporectomy. While Dr. Hodel was not a practicing surgeon, he had likely been trained in the procedure in medical school. Second, there were reports that the Los Angeles District Attorney's file contains notes indicating that a female witness reported that Hodel knew Elizabeth Short. However, the strength of this link is disputed by some researchers, and to my knowledge, the witness has not been identified. Alright, so can you see the contrast in information? Let's say, for example, somebody's going to say, all right, well, there's this secret witness who can place him there. Okay, well, who is this witness? No idea. All right, I throw that stuff out. But when suspects are placed on the list of widely discussed persons of interest for the crimes that I follow, the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, the Black Dahlia Avenger, and people are saying, if they actually were the killer, they probably would have been caught already. I don't accept that. Can you see the difference in information and the difference in the thought process? One of them is just kind of making the assumption that, well, the authorities probably knew what they were doing, so this person had nothing to do with it. I don't like that type of thinking. But when you just make up just an imaginary person X who is the key to everything, and you don't know who this imaginary person X is, like in regards to this suspect and the witness who can connect them, that stuff I am much more dismissive of. But let's keep going here with the book. Dr. Hodel first came onto the radar of the Los Angeles County law enforcement when his secretary and clinic manager Ruth Frances Spaulding died under questionable circumstances on May 9th of 1945. No charges were ever brought against Dr. Hodel, and Ruth Spaulding's death was ruled a suicide by overdose. And this will become the famous connection that George Hodel has to his secretary, where he was caught saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They couldn't talk to my secretary, Ruth Spaulding, anymore because she's dead. And Ruth Spaulding's name is actually put in parentheses for the purpose of that quotation, but they can't talk to my secretary because she's dead. This is another thing that is going to be very, very important when examining statements. If you watch any general video about the Black Dahlia, you will probably encounter that quote and phrase from George Hodel, and I know that it's damning. I know it makes it look like someone is really guilty. For a long time, I even accepted that George Hodel was the Black Dahlia Avenger, but that is not enough. That's just an ambiguous statement, and that would absolutely not hold up in a court of law. You'd be like, well, all that means is they can't talk to my secretary. All that means is she's not available for comment. Any attorney would dismantle that particular narrative, and I think most of you guys are in agreement with that. But interestingly, one of the sources that was used for this book is the set of commentaries that were made by Larry Harnish, someone whom I talk about all the time now on Dahlia Thursday, and he is used as some of the source material for this book. And the suspect that seems to be thought of most favorably by Denise Diana Huddle is none other than Walter Bailey, a suspect that has been proposed by Larry Harnish. Larry Harnish started looking at the Black Dahlia case in 1996 for the 50th anniversary that was going to happen in 1997. He was working for the LA Times, and he is a real journalist, and I do call him an expert on the case, although he did ban me from his live streams. If anybody heard the latest Black Dahlia AMA, he says I will not talk to Black Box Online Radio, even on the live chats, because he does not do interviews. I have never tried to interview him. I've never even contacted him. I was just participating in the Q&A session, and he said he wouldn't answer any questions from me because I run this true crime channel here. I suppose that is his right. However, in terms of a suspect that has been proposed, Larry Harnish has landed on Dr. Walter Bailey, who was the subject of last week's Black Dahlia Thursday. And Walter Bailey is a different type of suspect because, much as Larry Harnish said, the ones that are widely known and the ones that have been put out by the district attorney's office and law enforcement, in his mind, have been cleared. Dr. Walter Bailey was never an official suspect. Leslie Dillon was put under surveillance, and George Hodel was put under surveillance, and they were never arrested. But Dr. Walter Bailey was never an official suspect. And if you did not hear last week's episode, I'll provide the nutshell version, and that is that Walter Bailey was 66 years old at the time of the Black Dahlia murder, and he ran LA County Medical Center. He was also a professor of surgery at the University of Southern California. He was recently divorced prior to the murder. We're talking only about 4 or 5 months prior to the murder. He was divorced. He had a long-running affair with a woman named Alexandra Petrovna. Excuse me if I've misstated her name, but he was having a major affair. And then let's actually have a little bit of a read here from Denise Diana Huddle's book. Further research led Larry Harnish to discover that the house at 3959 South Norton Avenue was owned by Ruth Bailey, the estranged wife of Walter Bailey, M.D. Dr. Bailey was an esteemed gynecological surgeon who had begun an affair with a colleague named Dr. Alexandra von Patrica. There we go. When Ruth discovered the affair, she separated from Walter and moved out of the Norton Avenue house. Walter Bailey died on January 4th of 1948 in the VA hospital in Los Angeles. His death certificate listed the cause of death as bronchopneumonia exacerbated by myocardial infarction. All right, though, but, she does seem to think very highly of Dr. Walter Bailey as a suspect, and one of the particular reasons was that he actually experienced a lot of traumatic events in his life, and also he was a former morphine addict, and I'm going to read that for you guys right now from a different page. He was committed on November 18th of 1912 and admitted to a hospital on November 21st of 1912 at 4:45 p.m. He was discharged on January 16th. And Dr. Walter Bailey was a prominent physician from a respected family, and he had been committed to a state psychiatric institution for just 2 days short of 14 months for an addiction to morphine. And I completely get it. You're looking at things like, all right, so he has some impulse control, mental health issues, as well as physical health issues, addiction issues, which might show that these things have affected his mindset, right? But you guys may have been paying attention to those dates. 1912, 1914. The Black Dahlia murder happened in 1947. Should we not also think that those things are so old? Like, those things happened decades prior to the Black Dahlia murder. Do you think that they would still be relevant? And I think that if we're going to look at Walter Bailey as a genuine suspect and actually ask the question, was Walter Bailey the Black Dahlia Avenger? I think we need to approach it from this angle that people have suspicions, people have concerns. There are reasons why they think that he was the Black Dahlia. And I think the narrative would have to go something like this. This man was getting older. He was entering the final stages of his life. He, as a medical doctor, knew that he was going to die soon. And did Elizabeth Short do something to him? Did he know her personally? Did he get triggered by her physical appearance? And then did he arrange this murder because he was expecting that he wasn't going to live for very long and he would never get caught, or he would never have to do any real jail time for it? He dies 1 year after the Black Dahlia murder took place, almost 1 year to the day. So is that the mindset? Because when I did the Walter Bailey episode, you guys in the comments section were just saying, all right, well, we can see where we can see why people are suspecting this guy, but did he have any known connection to Elizabeth Short? And that is something that I've never found out, that I've never read about him, and I'm not completely sure. But I would love to know what you guys think. I think that Walter Bailey is a fascinating suspect. I do think there's a chance that he did this, but I really think that he's almost too old of a suspect, and we're probably dealing with somebody who's considerably younger. He did go through tragedies in life. His son dies in the 1920s even, and that's about 6 or 7 years after he's discharged from the state hospital. But at the same time, is that really a thing? Are those really incidents that can be relevant to the 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short? I get that, he has some mental health issues and impulse control issues, but is that stuff relevant to the murder of Elizabeth Short in 1947? I would love to know what you guys think, and you can drop your ideas in the comment section down below. And there's actually a quote here that is in the book that is coming to us from the FBI profiler John Douglas, somebody whom I simply cannot seem to stop talking about. And it says, John Douglas's profile of the killer pointed to the dump site as a location of some significance to the murderer. And Bailey's family home was less than a block away, and it was a home from which he had been exiled due to his infidelity. His daughter was acquainted with Elizabeth's sister, and he was a physician with surgical skills and addiction issues. Bailey ticks several boxes on the likely suspect list. Absolutely, he ticks several boxes, but there are just so many giant concerns. Number one, did he actually do it? Did he actually know Elizabeth Short? And number two, was he the type of person that would have lured Elizabeth Short to the vulnerable area? How did this stuff take place? And is he just a medical doctor who happened to live in the vicinity? In LA County, you might expect that you're going to have a lot of medical doctors if you were just to pull up the census or just to cut out a giant chunk of southern Los Angeles. You might have a medical doctor here and there. And was he just happen the one who lived close by? Does that mean that he has been unfairly vilified and unfairly labeled as a suspect? I want to hear from you guys. Please drop your responses in the comments section down below. But in terms of the dump site having a significance to the perpetrator, I can mostly accept that, and I always say this, John Douglas knows more about true crime than I do. John Douglas is the real deal. He was a professional criminal profiler, the more or less father of the FBI behavioral profiling unit. But can I just propose one alternative to you? Can I just propose one alternative? And that would be that, what if the dump site did not have significance to the killer in a personal way? What if the dump site did not have significance to the Black Dahlia Avenger for any emotional reason? What if it was chosen for practicality? Because this person knew that during some time between, let's say, 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. during the mornings, there was really, really light traffic, and that this was a space where not many people were going to be passing by, and they thought that this is the appropriate location to dump the body. It has no real geographic connection to their house. It's not their backyard. It's not reminding them of a place where they were exiled from. This dump site was chosen for practical reasons. Look at everything else about the Black Dahlia case. Practical. Practical. Using brushes to scrub Elizabeth Short's body so that there is no evidence that was left behind. Covering the papers in gasoline so that fingerprints couldn't be traced back, or destroying grease stains. Everything about this person is hyper-methodical. What if the dump site was chosen for a hyper-methodical reason and not an emotional one? And ultimately, that's where I think we're going to leave it at for this episode. And this is a book that I've mentioned in multiple other cases here on Black Box Online Radio. Anthrax to Zodiac by Denise Diana Huddle. And I've been in talks with her about coming on the show. I would love to have her on as a guest so I can talk to her about the material that is in her book. And she has covered many cases that I follow here. And the first one that I ever did a response to is actually the Anthrax killer. And you can find that on BBO War under the names The Anthrax Killer and the Zodiac Killer True Crime Talk Radio. And also, there are responses that I've done to her segment on JonBenet Ramsey, as well as D.B. Cooper. And, of course, the Zodiac stuff has been worked into these sets of recordings, and I do them every Monday, but they're always like little bits and pieces of things that get worked into Zodiac Monday. It's done in a little bit of a different format than the other shows, and if you're a new listener to BBO War, feel free to check out some of these stories. I have lots of episodes about JonBenet Ramsey, D.B. Cooper, and the Zodiac Killer, and believe it or not, also about the Anthrax Killer. I have about 5 or 6 episodes about the Anthrax Killer, although they're done in a different format. They aren't done in the same style that I have been making episodes in lately, but I do, really appreciate a lot of the content that has been created by writers, and I've also said that if somebody has taken the time to write a book, I will evaluate it and discuss it. Larry Harnish is reportedly working on a massive book that will be coming out. I'm expecting that it's going to be about 700 or 800 pages, maybe even more. Who knows what to expect there. And I was a little bit disappointed about being banned from his AMAs. I had so many questions for him, and perhaps he knew that I was going to be working them into Black Box Online Radio, and he wanted to do everything indirectly, but at the same time, for somebody like me, who is a newcomer to the case, this is something that I found to be extremely valuable. Watching his videos, listening to his channel, I found it to be very valuable. And you know who else thought that? Denise Diana Huddle. It's all in her book. She cites him as one of the strongest sources. So I really do appreciate the other work from experts, and also, even from people like John Douglas, even though I think he's a little bit off the mark sometimes. But you know what? Everybody else says that. I've only really met one person who listened to Black Box Online Radio and just said, John Douglas is right about everything. Everybody else seems to have some other type of issue. And as far as the other sources that are discussed in this book, she mentions James Elroy, as well as the Black Dahlia in Hollywood. And I'm also hoping that we're going to hear more from Eli Frankel in the future. I want to know more about the way that he's going to arrange things. But I'm going to approach his book, Sisters in Death, with a lot of skepticism. Alright, well, that will be it for me now. Thank you so much for listening to Dahlia Thursday. And if you have any comments about the Black Dahlia case, please drop them in the comment section down below. You guys already know about buymeacoffee.com, so I'll let you know that you can download the images for this program at True Crime Designs on Facebook. They are archived over there. You can also download the audio version of this program for free on Spotify and Apple Podcasts under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast. And you can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan. There's also a Black Box Online Radio Facebook page. And there is a page on Instagram, blackboxned88. And I use these pages to release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on YouTube. They mostly talk about serial killers, true crime news, and anything under the sun or in the darkness. Feel free to check out any of the content here on the channel, and I'll see you tomorrow for an episode about D.B. Cooper. Until next time.